Nestled in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Amityville, Long Island, there stood a house unlike any other. From the outside, it seemed almost idyllic, a large Dutch colonial home with gabled windows and a welcoming front porch. But the house at 112 Ocean Avenue held a secret, a darkness that waited beneath its walls. In 1974, the house became infamous for the gruesome murders of 6 members of the DeFeo family. But it was not until a year later, when the Lutz family moved in, that the house's true horror was revealed. In the early hours of November 13, 1974, the quiet town of Amityville was shattered by the brutal slayings of the DeFeo family. Inside 112 Ocean Avenue, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed his father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters while they slept. Each victim was found lying face down in their beds, as if they had never stirred during the attack. But what haunted the town even more than the murders themselves was the lingering question: why did no one hear the gunshots? And why had none of the victims attempted to escape? A little over a year after the murders, George and Kathy Lutz bought the house for what seemed like a bargain price. They were aware of its bloody history but dismissed it, eager to make it their dream home. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. They laughed, unpacked, and marveled at the house's size. But soon the atmosphere began to change. It started with small things: cold drafts in rooms where there were no windows open, strange noises in the night, and an overwhelming sense that they were being watched. The first real sign of trouble came when George Lutz began waking up every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed the murders. No matter how tired he was, something would pull him from sleep, leaving him restless and cold. Then came the smells, foul, overwhelming odors that filled the house without explanation. The family's dog, Harry, would bark relentlessly at the basement door, growling at something unseen. But it was in the children's rooms where the real terror began. Missy, the Lutz's young daughter, began speaking to an imaginary friend named Jody, a pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. Soon, the strange occurrences escalated. Windows slammed shut on their own, crucifixes turned upside down, and doors would burst open without warning. George's personality began to change. He became irritable, obsessed with chopping wood and tending to the fire, as if he couldn't get warm. Kathy began having vivid nightmares of the murders, seeing herself and her children lying in pools of blood. The house's walls would ooze a strange, black substance, and the family began hearing disembodied voices telling them to get out. Missy's friend Jody became a source of increasing fear. She would describe the creature in terrifying detail, speaking of its glowing red eyes and its ability to change shape. Kathy once saw Jody's reflection in the window, a monstrous pig-like figure standing behind her daughter. George grew more erratic, convinced that something evil was living in the house with them. The family even attempted a blessing with a priest, but instead of banishing the spirits, it seemed to anger them. The priest warned them to leave, but it was already too late. The house had claimed them. After weeks of torment, the final night in the house was the worst. The family was terrorized by unseen forces. George wakes up at 3:15 a.m. again, but this time the entire house feels different, thicker, like the air itself is suffocating them. The temperature has dropped drastically, leaving frost on the windows even in the middle of summer. As George makes his way downstairs, the basement door swings open on its own, creaking loudly in the silence. From within the basement, a low growl emerges, deep and guttural, as though something is waiting in the darkness below. Kathy wakes with a start, finding herself unable to move, as if something is holding her down. A cold, invisible hand grasps her arm, and she is suddenly yanked upwards, her body lifting off the bed. The sensation is unnatural, as though something is pulling her from within, twisting her into a grotesque position. Her scream is muffled, caught in her throat, as George rushes into the room, horror-stricken at the sight of his wife floating several feet above the bed. Downstairs, the children are awoken by the sounds of heavy footsteps racing through the house, though no one is there. Missy clutches her doll tightly, her eyes wide in terror as Jody appears again, standing at the foot of her bed. The pig-like creature grins, its glowing red eyes locking onto Missy as it speaks, but the words are inaudible, drowned out by the thunderous banging echoing through the house. The walls themselves seem to shake, the structure groaning as though it's alive. The entire house descends into chaos. The crucifixes on the walls turn upside down, furniture crashes violently, and a thick black ooze begins to seep from the walls, creeping along the floors like blood. The family is in full panic mode, desperately trying to gather their children and escape the house. George grabs Kathy, still trembling from her levitation, and the two of them rush toward the children's rooms. The door to Missy's room slams shut just as they approach, trapping her inside with Jody. George pounds on the door, shouting her name as the voices inside grow louder, more insistent. "Get out!" they scream, overlapping one another in a chorus of rage. Missy's terrified cries can be heard over the din as the door finally bursts open, revealing her standing in the center of the room, her face pale, and Jody nowhere to be found. Without a second thought, George sweeps her into his arms, and the family races down the stairs, the sound of footsteps chasing them from behind. As they reach the front door, it slams shut in front of them, locking with an almost mechanical click. The house groans, the walls trembling as though something massive is about to tear through them. Desperate, George kicks the door with all his strength, and at last, it bursts open. The family spills out onto the front lawn, panting and wide-eyed. The night outside is unnaturally dark, the stars obscured by heavy clouds. The house stands behind them, silent and still once again, but they know they can never go back. They leave everything behind, their clothes, their furniture, their memories, fleeing into the night with nothing but their lives. As they drive away, Kathy looks back one last time. In one of the upper windows, she sees it. The unmistakable glow of red eyes staring down at her from within the shadows of the house. The Amityville Horror is a story that transcends the typical haunted house tale, weaving elements of psychological torment, spiritual darkness, and visceral fear into a narrative that has terrified audiences for decades. While the events that transpired within the house may never be fully understood, one thing is certain. Whatever resides in 112 Ocean Avenue is something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The legend of the house has grown, with each retelling adding new layers of fear. Paranormal investigators, priests, and curious visitors have all tried to uncover the truth. But the house remains elusive, its secrets buried within its walls. Whether it's the restless spirits of the DeFeo family, a demonic entity, or something far older and darker, the Amityville house has earned its place in the annals of horror. The Lutz family's experiences at 112 Ocean Avenue became the stuff of legend. Paranormal investigators, including Ed and Lorraine Warren, claimed that the house was infested with malevolent spirits. Books and films have chronicled the story, but to this day, no one knows the full truth of what happened in that house. Was it truly haunted by the spirits of the DeFeo family, or was there something even darker at play? One thing is certain: 112 Ocean Avenue continues to cast a long shadow over those who dare to step inside.